Sometimes the smallest act of courage can save a life and change the way we see the world forever. Deep in Tanzania's Serengeti, a magnificent lion was on the brink of death, swarmed by millions of flies, its eyes barely open, struggling to breathe. What happened next is a story of bravery, compassion, and an unimaginable bond between human and wild predator. If you believe in the power of compassion and want to witness this incredible story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with us as we follow every moment of this unforgettable rescue. That air was thick with a sound that made Dr. Marcus Thompson stop dead in his tracks. A low, constant, almost mechanical buzzing, reverberating across the plains of Tanzania's Serengeti, carried unnaturally far. From 2 miles away, the noise alone was enough to make his stomach churn. As a wildlife conservationist with over 15 years of field experience, Marcus thought he had seen everything. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what lay ahead. Through his binoculars, he scanned the dirt road cutting through the golden grasses. At first, it appeared as though the sun had cast a strange shadow across the path. But the closer he looked, the more horrifying the truth became. A massive male lion, easily 450 pounds, with a mane darker than the midnight sky, lay completely motionless on the dusty ground. And he was covered, not in dust or mud, but in what seemed like a living, writhing black carpet. Millions of flies, possibly 25 million or more, had gathered with an almost unnatural precision. They were feeding, crawling over one another, and laying eggs, a ravenous swarm that refused to yield. The lion's body twitched slightly as some flies found weak points, burrowing into raw, infected flesh. This was beyond anything Marcus had ever encountered in his career. He adjusted his binoculars, noting the gruesome details. The open wounds along the lion's hind leg, the swelling around his eyes, the way his nostrils were blocked by an impenetrable mass of insects. "This is unimaginable," Marcus whispered into his recording device, his voice barely above a breath. "Advanced stage meiosis, millions of flies actively feeding. The animal is alive, but barely. Breathing is shallow, eyes completely obstructed. This is critical, absolutely critical." The story began 3 days earlier, according to reports from local rangers and a Maasai guide named John McCain. The lion, known to locals as Mafal, had sustained a territorial injury during a fight with another male. A 6-inch wound on his rear leg, initially painful but survivable, had attracted the first wave of flies. Over 3 days, however, the situation had escalated into something almost apocalyptic. The swarm had grown exponentially, drawn to the scent of blood, and was now relentless in its feeding frenzy. Marcus's eyes drifted toward the cubs. 2 young lions, barely 8 months old, sat about 30 yards away. They were exhausted, their coats dusty, their bodies thin from lack of nourishment. Their father had been their protector, their teacher, and now they were helpless observers. For 3 days they had not eaten, not moved closer, not attacked the swarm. They simply sat, watching. Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest as he realized that these cubs were fully aware of the danger, yet utterly powerless to intervene. "The cubs have been there for 3 days, John reported quietly beside Marcus. "They won't leave, but they can't help him. They're getting weaker. I don't know how much longer they can survive without food." The ethical and professional conflict clawed at Marcus. The Tanzania National Parks Authority had strict protocols. No human intervention in natural predation or wildlife events. Conservation meant observing, documenting, not interfering. Marcus radioed the base camp, carefully describing the situation, the severity of the infestation, and the immediate danger to the cubs. The response was swift, firm, and cold. Negative. Protocols did not allow interference. Document and observe. That was all. Marcus stared at Mafal, lying in agony while the swarming flies gnawed at living flesh. His mind raced, weighing every possible outcome, every consequence. Following protocol would mean certain death for the lion and likely starvation or vulnerability for his cubs. Yet intervening would be a violation of the law, potentially ending his career, revoking research permits, and setting off a storm of administrative backlash. Then the decision solidified in his mind, not as a thought, but as a conviction. "I'm going off protocol," he announced, his voice low, resolute. Kim, his research partner who had arrived just moments earlier, froze. "Marcus, this could destroy us. The park could revoke every permit we've ever had," she warned. "I know," he replied calmly, loading the back of his vehicle with high-powered insect repellent, a portable compressor system, antibiotic ointments, and all emergency veterinary supplies he could carry. "But watching him die while I do nothing, that's a price I can't pay." Approaching the lion required extreme caution. Even in a weakened state, Mafal could deliver a fatal bite or swipe of a paw if startled. Marcus and Sarah moved slowly, carefully, establishing a perimeter with industrial-strength potheen spray to drive the flies back. The first application caused a visible reaction. The flies lifted en masse, forming a cloud that temporarily blocked out the sun, a black storm hovering over the plains. For a moment, the lion's body was exposed, revealing the true scale of the damage. The skin was raw, shredded, and in some areas, necrotic. Bone was visible through gaping wounds, and maggot infestations thrived in at least a dozen separate locations. Marcus's heart clenched at the sight. The leg wound that had initially attracted the swarm was now a crater nearly a foot wide, infected to the bone, oozing with fluid. His mouth pressed into a thin line as he began to assess the work ahead. He first focused on Mafal's respiratory passages. Using targeted sprays and bursts of high-pressure air, Marcus cleared flies from the nostrils, ears, and mouth. Slowly, the lion's breathing became more regular, and for the first time in 3 days, his eyes began to open. Amber, intelligent eyes, filled not with aggression, not with fear, but with a raw recognition, a desperate acknowledgement that help had arrived. Sarah documented the scene, her camera capturing the impossible. Marcus's hands worked quickly but carefully, treating each wound, assessing each infestation. The lion remained almost disturbingly calm, allowing these humans to intervene in what would normally be a life-or-death encounter. The cubs, sensing a shift, inched closer. Instead of running, they positioned themselves between their father and potential threats, as if understanding that these humans were helping, not harming. "This is unprecedented," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "I've never seen wild cubs act like this." For Marcus, the weight of the moment pressed down like the Serengeti sun. This was not just an emergency rescue. It was a confrontation with the raw reality of life, death, and the moral responsibilities of humans when witnessing suffering in the wild. The lion's survival depended entirely on them. Every second counted. As he prepped for the next stage, full treatment of the maggot-infested wounds and administering life-saving antibiotics, Marcus felt the first stirrings of hope. The lion's chest rose and fell more steadily. The eyes remained open, tracking his movements, reflecting a profound, almost human understanding. In that moment, Marcus realized that this was more than a rescue. This was the beginning of something extraordinary. The plains of the Serengeti were silent, except for the faint buzz of lingering flies and the soft, cautious sounds of 2 cubs learning, perhaps for the first time, the meaning of trust beyond their species. Marcus breathed deeply, steeling himself for the hours ahead. He had crossed the line of protocol, but in doing so, he had committed himself to saving a life, an apex predator whose fate had become inseparable from his own courage, skill, and compassion. And so, under the relentless African sun, the rescue began. The distance between the humans and the lion may have been only a few dozen yards, but the tension felt as if it spanned miles. Every step Marcus Thompson took toward Mafal was calculated, measured, a careful negotiation with a predator who could still kill in an instant. The air carried a mixture of sweat, dust, and the sharp chemical tang of industrial insecticide. Marcus had never faced a rescue so perilous, not because of the wild terrain, but because of the combination of a dying predator, millions of relentless insects, and the ethical boundaries he had chosen to cross. "Stay close," Marcus whispered to Dr. Sarah Kim, who followed a step behind, notebook and camera in hand. "We move slowly. Every sudden movement will trigger him." The first task was establishing a perimeter that could safely hold back the swarm. Using potheen spray, Marcus created a boundary around Mafal. The chemicals produced an immediate effect. Thousands of flies lifted into the sky, forming a dark, swirling cloud. For a few fleeting moments, the lion's body was visible, marred by open wounds, matted fur, and crawling larvae. The sight was simultaneously terrifying and sobering. Some wounds were deep enough that bones protruded, the tissue necrotic and vulnerable. Maggots wriggled violently as Marcus approached, each movement reminding him of the delicate balance between life and death he was stepping into. He moved with a precision born of experience, his hands never trembling as he prepared to begin direct treatment. "Let's start with the respiratory passages," Marcus said, kneeling carefully near the lion's head. He applied bursts of high-pressure air mixed with targeted insecticide to clear the flies from the nostrils, mouth, and ears. Mafal hissed softly, a low, warning rumble that resonated deep in his chest but did not attempt to strike. His eyes, though swollen and obscured by the insect swarm, tracked Marcus intently. Marcus knew that if he startled Mafal, the result could be fatal. A single swipe could end his life, or worse, injure Sarah. He worked with deliberate precision, removing flies and applying antiseptic sprays, step by agonizing step. With each successful clearing, Mafal's breathing improved. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible deepening of his chest, but it was progress. "Look at the cubs," Sarah murmured. The two young lions were cautiously inching closer, their movements tentative yet deliberate. Instead of fleeing from the humans, they seemed to be evaluating the situation, their eyes fixed on their father. For 3 days they had witnessed him in agony, and now, slowly, they were beginning to grasp that these humans were not a threat. The next phase involved removing the maggots feeding within Mafal's open wounds. Marcus opened his portable medical kit and pulled out sterile tweezers, antiseptic solution, and surgical gloves. The task was painstaking, each larva embedded in flesh, some nearly an inch long. He worked methodically, extracting hundreds of these parasites. Each removal was crucial. Leaving them inside could result in systemic infection or irreversible tissue damage. As he worked, Marcus marveled at Mafal's demeanor. Despite the excruciating pain, the lion remained astonishingly calm. His deep amber eyes followed Marcus's hands, a look of comprehension that transcended instinct. It was as if Mafal understood the necessity of this intervention, that the temporary discomfort would preserve his life. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting a harsh golden light over the Serengeti. Sweat ran down Marcus's face, mingling with dust, yet he persisted. The swarm, though diminished, remained a constant nuisance, buzzing and circling in the periphery. Sarah continued documenting every moment, capturing not just the technical procedures, but the extraordinary interactions between predator and human. "This is going to take hours," Sarah said softly, almost to herself. "And even then, we're not sure he'll make it. The leg wound, it's gone too deep." Marcus nodded grimly. The leg wound, initially 6 inches long from a territorial fight, had become a festering crater nearly a foot in diameter. Infection had spread to the bone, and necrotic tissue threatened systemic sepsis. Yet despite the severity, Mafal had survived 3 days in agony, a testament to the lion's resilience and the raw force of life itself. With careful hands, Marcus began debriding the necrotic tissue, irrigating the wound with antibiotic solution, while monitoring the lion's vitals. His voice was low and calm as he reassured Mafal, speaking softly, though the lion may not have understood the words themselves. Still, the tone conveyed intent, care, not threat. The cubs shifted closer, one sitting near the lion's head, the other at his flank. Their behavior was extraordinary. Rather than fleeing, they seemed to act as guardians, positioning themselves in ways that protected their father from potential danger. Sarah whispered into her camera, "I've never seen wild cubs do this. It's almost human." After nearly 2 hours, the initial treatments began to show results. Mafal's breathing steadied, his eyes tracked movements more steadily, and the cloud of flies had thinned considerably. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though he knew the most critical work lay ahead, preventing systemic infection and stabilizing the lion enough for safe transport. He prepared intramuscular antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medications, calculating dosages meticulously based on Mafal's estimated body weight and the severity of his condition. Administering the injections required precision and nerve. The lion flinched slightly at each needle but did not lash out, a remarkable display of trust. As Marcus worked, a subtle change in the cub's behavior became evident. The lion cubs, previously passive observers, began to interact cautiously with the humans, brushing against them and watching intently as their father received treatment. Their trust mirrored Mafal's, a quiet acknowledgement that these people were allies, not threats. Hours melted into one another, each wound cleaned, each maggot removed, each spray applied was a victory, yet Marcus remained hyper-aware that failure at any stage could be catastrophic. The lion had lost an estimated 40 pounds during the 3-day ordeal, and his body was covered in open, infected wounds. Still, progress was undeniable. Finally, Marcus reached the most critical point, the head and respiratory area. This required delicate precision, for a misstep could trigger Mafal's defensive instincts. Using a combination of compressed air and concentrated insecticide, he methodically cleared the final clusters of flies from the nose, ears, and mouth. The lion's breathing, once shallow and obstructed, deepened into full, steady inhalations. For the first time, the amber eyes fully opened, revealing recognition and astonishingly gratitude. "Look at him," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "He knows we're saving him." Marcus's own hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. This was not just an animal survival story. It was a profound interaction between species, a moment that defied the boundaries of instinct and showcased intelligence, awareness, and trust. The cubs nudged their father, seeking reassurance, and in turn, Mafal responded with subtle movements of acknowledgement, a silent communication that transcended words. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Marcus allowed himself a brief reflection. He had violated protocol, risked his career, and faced a potentially lethal predator. But the sight of Mafal's steady breathing and alert gaze justified every risk. The rescue, dangerous and exhausting as it was, had become a defining moment, not just for him, but for the understanding of human-animal bonds in the wild. And as night fell over the Serengeti, casting long shadows across the plains, the first real hope of survival glimmered. Mafal, the lion who had teetered on the brink of death, was breathing freely, his wounds partially treated, his cubs at his side. The rescue was far from complete, but the impossible had already begun to unfold. For Marcus Thompson, there was no turning back. The dangerous rescue had succeeded in buying time, and in doing so had opened the door to a story that would defy every expectation about lions, loyalty, and the power of compassion. The sun had dipped lower in the Serengeti sky, casting long shadows across the plains as a doctor. Marcus Thompson prepared for the most critical phase of the rescue. Mafal, the lion, had survived the initial insecticide treatment and partial clearing of flies, but the deeper wounds still posed an immediate threat to his life. Necrotic tissue and maggot infestations penetrated the flesh, and infection had already reached areas dangerously close to bone. One wrong move could trigger shock, or worse, fatal defensive aggression. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself. The lion lay semi-conscious, eyes half open, tracking every subtle movement. The hum of distant insects had diminished, but the faint residual buzz reminded Marcus that nature was still at war with this majestic predator. "This is it," he whispered to Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been documenting the operation. "The next few hours determine if he survives or not." He began by inspecting Mafal's rear leg, the site of the original territorial wound. The injury had expanded far beyond its initial 6-inch gash into a crater nearly a foot wide. Flesh was rotten in patches, and dark maggots squirmed violently, consuming tissue that should have remained intact. Marcus donned gloves, sterilized instruments, and antiseptic sprays, fully aware that this procedure was both delicate and brutal. The debridement had to be meticulous. Every inch of necrotic tissue had to be removed without damaging the surrounding, healthy muscle. Using surgical tweezers, Marcus began the painstaking process of extracting larvae one by one. Some were almost an inch long, having feasted undisturbed for 72 hours. Each extraction was accompanied by careful irrigation with broad-spectrum antibiotics to prevent systemic infection. Mafal flinched occasionally, low rumbles escaping his throat, but did not lash out. His compliance was astonishing for a wild predator under such stress. Sarah watched silently, occasionally adjusting her camera. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured. "He trusts you. Completely." Marcus didn't respond verbally. He couldn't afford to break concentration. He worked methodically, section by section, clearing maggots, applying antiseptics, and monitoring vitals. The lion's breathing had begun to stabilize, but his heart rate was still elevated from stress. Every spray, every removal, every measured movement was a delicate negotiation between human skill and animal instinct. Once the rear leg was sufficiently cleared, Marcus moved to the lion's torso. Here, maggots had infiltrated multiple open sores, some so deep that bone could be glimpsed beneath the raw flesh. Each site required careful attention. If infection penetrated deeper into the muscles or internal organs, death from sepsis was almost inevitable. Marcus worked with unwavering focus, speaking softly to Mafal in a low, rhythmic tone. The words themselves were irrelevant. The calm, deliberate cadence conveyed intent. He was not a threat. Meanwhile, the cubs had inched even closer. Their earlier hesitancy had shifted into an almost protective behavior. One cub sat near the lion's head, the other alongside his flank, eyes wide and alert. Occasionally, they would nuzzle their father, a delicate gesture that seemed to signal both comfort and solidarity. Marcus allowed a faint smile. Even in the direst circumstances, life found a way to express resilience. The most delicate and dangerous part of the intervention was the lion's head and respiratory area. Mafal's nostrils, mouth, and ears had been blocked by thousands of flies, and the risk of shock was highest here. Marcus carefully used compressed air to dislodge remaining insects and sprayed concentrated insecticide in micro-targeted bursts. Each movement required precision. Too forceful, and Mafal could react instinctively. Too hesitant, and infection risk increased. Slowly, the lion began to breathe more deeply. His eyes cleared further, amber irises reflecting trust and an almost human understanding that this temporary discomfort was a path to survival. With the critical infestations treated, Marcus prepared intramuscular antibiotics and anti-inflammatory injections. Calculating doses with meticulous accuracy, he administered them to Mafal's massive frame. The lion flinched at the needles but did not attempt to escape or attack. Each injection represented a small victory, a step closer to stabilizing a creature who had teetered on the edge of death 4 days. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment to observe the cubs. They had relaxed slightly, their protective postures softening. It was as if they had begun to internalize a new understanding. Humans could be allies, not threats, and their father's survival depended on this interspecies cooperation. Sarah captured the interaction, her camera documenting the unprecedented scene for science, for conservation, and for a world that rarely glimpsed such profound connections. Hours passed, sunlight faded, replaced by the cool blue of twilight. The lion, though still weak, showed signs of resilience. His chest rose and fell with steady, deliberate breaths. The wounds, though still severe, had been treated to the point that infection risk was controlled. Mafal lifted his head slightly, a tentative motion, eyes fixed on Marcus. There was no fear, no aggression, only acknowledgement. "This is remarkable," Sarah said quietly, voice barely audible. "He recognizes you. He knows you are helping him." Marcus allowed himself a faint nod, though his mind remained alert. The most critical aspect was not just physical treatment, but maintaining trust. Any mistake could undo hours of careful progress. He spoke softly to the lion, hands moving with measured precision as he cleaned residual wounds and applied healing ointments. Each touch reinforced the understanding that humans could be a source of aid, not harm. By the time night fully fell, the first real milestones had been achieved. Mafal's breathing had normalized, his body temperature stabilized, and the majority of fly infestations had been removed. Even the cubs seemed to sense the shift, curling closer to their father, a silent expression of relief. Marcus documented every procedure, aware that this could be one of the most extraordinary cases of human-animal cooperation ever recorded. But despite the progress, the challenges were far from over. Mafal had lost significant weight, his massive frame diminished by 3 days of suffering. The leg wound remained deep, requiring ongoing irrigation and antibiotics. Maggot larvae, though largely removed, had penetrated tissues that would continue to demand attention over the coming days. Marcus knew the next phase, recovery and continued medical care, would be just as intense and crucial as this initial intervention. And yet, amidst the exhaustion, the fear, and the relentless responsibility, a deeper observation emerged. Mafal, the lion who had once been a helpless victim of nature's brutality, was showing signs of intelligence, recognition, and gratitude. His eyes followed Marcus. His subtle movements communicated understanding, and his tolerance of human presence was nothing short of extraordinary. Marcus leaned back for a brief moment, allowing himself to breathe. The lion had survived the initial life-or-death phase. The cubs were unharmed, their trust evident, and the impossible bond, the recognition of compassion across species, had begun to form. He looked at Sarah, who shook her head slightly in disbelief. "We're witnessing something no one has documented before," she whispered. In the cool of the Serengeti night, the vast plains stretched silently around them. The stars emerged, casting faint light over the savanna, and Marcus realized that the dangerous rescue had accomplished more than just physical intervention. It had created a connection, an emotional thread between human and lion, predator and protector, teacher and witness. The trust of a wild animal, earned in hours of risk and compassion, had begun to redefine the boundaries of interspecies interaction. Marcus prepared to monitor Mafal through the night, establishing a temporary safe zone where he could continue treatments, clean wounds, and administer medication as required. The lion, now more alert and responsive, allowed Marcus to approach without aggression, a testament to the delicate balance of trust and care that had been established. For Marcus Thompson, this was only the beginning. The lion's journey from near death to survival would require relentless attention, patience, and continued courage. But the events of this day had already proven that extraordinary outcomes were possible when compassion and skill intersected with respect for nature. Mafal, breathing steadily and cautiously watching Marcus, had survived the impossible, and the story of this rescue was just beginning to unfold. By the early hours of the next morning, the Serengeti had transformed into a landscape of quiet anticipation. Mafal, the lion who had been at the brink of death, now rested with a tentative stability. His breathing had slowed, the rhythm more consistent than it had been in days, and the acute pain of the worst maggot-infested wounds had diminished thanks to Marcus Thompson's careful interventions. Still, he remained weak, his massive frame reduced by nearly 40 pounds, and every movement had to be treated with caution. Marcus and Sarah had set up a temporary treatment camp nearby, a small clearing with blankets, antiseptics, and medical equipment ready for immediate use. The cubs, once hesitant observers, now began to move more confidently. They were cautious but curious, circling their father, sniffing the perimeter of the human presence, and occasionally brushing against Marcus's legs. It was a subtle, yet profound indication of their evolving trust. In the wild, cubs rarely allow humans such proximity, especially under life-threatening circumstances. The first challenge of the day was re-evaluating the lion's wounds. While the initial removal of maggots and application of antibiotics had stabilized him, deep tissue infections remained a serious threat. Marcus prepared a concentrated antibiotic solution for irrigation, his hands steady as he carefully cleaned each lesion. The lion's eyes followed every movement, amber orbs fixed on Marcus with a mixture of awareness, trust, and patience. For Marcus, the realization was extraordinary. This wild predator, accustomed to dominance and aggression, was cooperating voluntarily, understanding, on some level, that the temporary discomfort of treatment was necessary for survival. As the morning sun climbed, the cubs moved closer to their father's side, displaying behavior that Marcus had never seen in wild lions. One cub positioned itself between Mafal's rear leg and the camp, almost as if guarding the wound. The other rested near his head, occasionally brushing against his fur in gentle reassurance. Sarah whispered into her camera, "It's as though they know we're allies, that we're helping their father survive." Marcus nodded silently, his focus split between the medical task at hand and the remarkable psychological phenomenon unfolding before him. With each injection of antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medication, Mafal grew slightly stronger. His breathing became more regular, and small movements of his paws and head indicated growing energy. Marcus documented every change meticulously, knowing that these observations were groundbreaking. No one had previously witnessed a wild lion not only surviving such an extreme infestation, but also forming a tentative bond with the humans responsible for its rescue. By midday, Marcus shifted focus to the cubs. Hunger and exhaustion had left them thin and vulnerable. He carefully approached with small portions of meat, placed at a safe distance to avoid startling Mafal. The cubs hesitated, sniffed cautiously, and then began eating, their trust in the humans growing with each bite. Mafal, watching intently, did not interfere, his focus seemingly split between recovery and overseeing the safety of his young. Marcus realized that the cubs' behavior mirrored their father's, trust built through consistent care and respect. As the day progressed, the most remarkable aspect of the rescue became evident. Mafal began to exhibit protective behaviors toward the humans themselves. He shifted his position slightly, placing himself between the camp and the surrounding grasslands, as if acknowledging the presence of potential threats. Hyenas and leopards roamed the area, yet the lion's vigilant watch over the camp seemed deliberate. Marcus and Sarah exchanged astonished glances. In all their years of research, no wild lion had ever behaved in such a manner toward humans. This was not mere tolerance. It was deliberate protective action. Marcus continued with wound care and injections, each step reinforcing trust. The cubs, increasingly relaxed, began to explore the camp cautiously, approaching Marcus and Sarah, sometimes brushing their heads against their human caregiver's hands. Mafal observed with keen attention, shifting only when necessary, but never displaying aggression. By late afternoon, the pattern was clear. An interspecies bond was forming, founded on gratitude, trust, and mutual respect. That evening, Marcus paused to observe. Mafal had managed to stand for the first time since the infestation began. He was unsteady but moved with purpose, nudging the cubs to follow. The young lions responded, tentatively testing their strength, circling their father and occasionally glancing at the humans with an almost knowing gaze. The sight struck Marcus profoundly. Here was a wild predator, recovering from near death, and simultaneously teaching his offspring a lesson in trust and cooperation that included humans as part of their environment. Over the next 24 hours, the recovery accelerated. Twice daily antibiotic injections and wound cleaning continued, and the lion began eating small amounts of meat placed near him. His cubs followed suit, no longer afraid, their growing strength evident in the firmness of their paws and the alertness of their eyes. Sarah filmed every interaction, noting not just the physical recovery, but the complex social and emotional dynamics emerging. By the third day, Mafal's behavior had shifted in a way that astonished both researchers. He began nudging the cubs closer to the humans, positioning them so that the cubs were near the safety of the camp while he remained alert. It was a remarkable demonstration of social intelligence. The lion understood the human's role in the survival of his family and acted to integrate this knowledge into protective strategies. Marcus recorded his observations meticulously. This was not instinct alone. It was deliberate, thoughtful action. With each day, the lion regained more strength. The wounds healed visibly, the maggots were gone, and the swelling had diminished. His once dull, matted mane began to recover its dark luster, a tangible sign of his returning vitality. The cubs, now energetic and playful, explored the camp with increasing confidence. Marcus watched them chase one another in the dirt, occasionally brushing against his legs or shoulders in fleeting displays of trust. Mafal observed, vigilant yet calm, as if confirming that his family was safe under the watch of these humans. By the end of the first week, the transformation was remarkable. Mafal had regained most of the lost weight, his movements more deliberate and his eyes clear, intelligent, and aware. The cubs were thriving, their dependence on the humans decreasing slightly as they learned to trust their father's leadership once more. Marcus reflected on the extraordinary nature of what he had witnessed, a lion recovering from a near-fatal infestation, forming an interspecies bond, and actively demonstrating protective instincts toward both his family and their human rescuers. Sarah, documenting the scene, whispered to Marcus, This challenges everything we know about wild predators. Emotional intelligence, social awareness, interspecies trust, it's all here. Marcus nodded. He understood the significance, not just as a researcher, but as a human privileged to witness a once-in-a-lifetime event. The rescue had not only saved a life, it had revealed a depth of cognition and emotion in wild lions that had never been fully appreciated. As dusk approached, the lion's behavior grew even more extraordinary. Mafal began moving around the camp perimeter, subtly patrolling, as if to ensure no threats approached the humans who had saved him. The cubs played nearby, occasionally rubbing against Marcus and Sarah, while Mafal remained vigilant. The emotional bond had solidified, gratitude, trust, and interdependence woven into a complex social dynamic. By nightfall, Marcus prepared a final assessment. Mafal's wounds were healing, his vitals stable, and the cubs were rested. The lion had begun to integrate humans into his concept of safety, a behavior never previously observed in the wild. Marcus knew that the coming weeks would require continued care and observation, but the initial phase of recovery had already achieved something extraordinary. As he packed up medical supplies for the evening, Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect. The lion's recovery was not just a testament to veterinary skill, but to the transformative power of compassion. In this remote corner of the Serengeti, amidst the unforgiving realities of nature, an interspecies bond had formed, a connection that transcended instinct and demonstrated the profound intelligence, empathy, and adaptability of one of the world's most magnificent predators. The moon rose over the Serengeti, casting pale silver light across the plains. Mafal, standing tall despite his wounds, his cubs close at his side, had not only survived but begun to thrive. And in doing so, he had forged a bond with humans that would redefine the very understanding of predator behavior, family loyalty, and the potential for cross-species empathy in the wild. Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The lion's journey of healing and trust had set the stage for the most extraordinary chapter yet. Weeks had passed since the initial rescue, and the Serengeti sun cast its familiar golden hue over the plains. Mafal, the lion once teetering on the brink of death, had made a full physical recovery. His wounds had healed completely, the once festering leg injury now concealed beneath a restored coat of dark, glossy fur. His mane, which had appeared lifeless and matted during the ordeal, flowed magnificently in the wind, a symbol of his renewed strength and resilience. The cubs, now robust and lively, had fully regained their energy, darting through the grass in playful circles, their amber eyes bright and curious. Marcus Thompson and Dr. Sarah Kim had established a temporary monitoring camp nearby, not for immediate medical necessity, but to observe the extraordinary behavior that was unfolding. What began as a dangerous rescue had evolved into a social experiment unlike any in wildlife history. Mafal, far from returning to pure instinctual behavior, demonstrated an awareness and intentionality that astounded both scientists. The lion now patrolled the perimeter of the camp, not as a territorial claim, but as an active guardian, ensuring that no hyena, leopard, or other threat approached the humans who had saved him. Marcus documented every movement, every nuance of behavior. "He's protecting us," Marcus whispered to Sarah one evening as the lion paced the edge of the camp. "Want the territory? Not even the cubs exclusively, but us. But he recognizes the humans who preserved his life." Sarah nodded, camera steady in her hands. The significance was profound. A wild predator was exhibiting deliberate protective behavior toward humans, an unprecedented observation in the annals of wildlife research. The bond between Mafal and Marcus deepened further when the lion began a ritual that neither scientist had anticipated. Each morning after the sun had risen over the savannah, Mafal would appear with a freshly killed antelope, placing it near Marcus's tent. At first, Marcus thought it was coincidental, an instinctual display, but repeated observations confirmed a pattern. Mafal was sharing his hunt, a behavior typically reserved for pride members, with a human. The gesture was deliberate, a form of gratitude, a recognition that Marcus had become part of his extended social circle. The cubs, now fully aware of the human presence as safe, integrated themselves into this daily ritual. They would play near the camp, occasionally receiving gentle scratches or soft words from Marcus and Sarah. In response, Mafal remained watchful, occasionally nudging the cubs back towards safety or positioning himself between the predators and his human allies. These interactions demonstrated an understanding of social dynamics, responsibility, and the emergent concept of interspecies cooperation. Marcus could scarcely believe the scene. As days turned into weeks, the lion's behavior grew more extraordinary. Mafal began to anticipate threats around the camp, moving with purpose to intercept even minor disturbances before they reached Marcus or Sarah. Hyenas approached, only to be met with the lion's imposing presence, prompting a rapid retreat. Even leopards, typically elusive and dangerous, maintained distance. The researchers realized that they now had a wild apex predator actively protecting them, a behavior entirely unprecedented. The cubs continued to thrive, guided by their father's restored strength and keen awareness. They interacted with Marcus and Sarah, learning to accept the humans as allies in subtle, nonverbal ways. Observing this, Marcus documented a new understanding. Lions possess not only intelligence and empathy, but the capacity for social adaptation beyond species lines. The cubs' behavior suggested that gratitude, trust, and recognition could be transmitted across generations when survival, care, and protection were involved. Months passed, and the lion's daily ritual of food sharing and camp patrol solidified. Marcus reflected on the broader implications. A wild animal, historically considered solely instinct-driven, had demonstrated not only memory, but intentional recognition, protective behavior, and interspecies social bonding. The Serengeti, in all its raw beauty, had become a laboratory for observing the profound intelligence of a predator in ways never before documented. News of the rescue eventually reached international audiences. Footage captured by Sarah and Marcus of Mafal presenting food, cubs playing unafraid, and protective patrols around the camp was featured in documentaries and scientific journals. Experts in animal behavior marveled at the demonstration of cross-species trust and gratitude. Jane Goodall herself visited the Serengeti to witness the interactions firsthand, describing the events as a striking example of emotional depth and social intelligence in wild predators, challenging centuries of assumptions about the boundaries between human and animal cognition. The bond that had formed during the critical rescue days remained intact over months. Mafal greeted Marcus with the same head-pressing behavior that had been exhibited during the lion's recovery, a silent but unmistakable acknowledgement of connection. The cubs, now young adults, recognized Marcus immediately and allowed him to approach without fear. Observing these interactions, Marcus realized that the emotional memory of aid and trust had endured, demonstrating both cognitive sophistication and social memory in lions. When the time came for Marcus to depart from the Serengeti, Mafal performed a farewell ritual unlike any seen before. The lion approached Marcus and gently pressed his massive head against the researcher's hands, holding the position while emitting low, rumbling vocalizations. The cubs followed suit, taking turns nuzzling Marcus in a seemingly organized display of farewell, awareness, and acknowledgement. Marcus, tears welling in his eyes, recorded the moment. It was not merely affection, it was a profound demonstration of social awareness, emotional intelligence, and memory. 6 months later, Marcus returned to the Serengeti for a follow-up study. Within minutes of his arrival, Mafal appeared as if awaiting him. The reunion was immediate, the recognition clear. The lion approached, head pressed against Marcus's chest, while the cubs playfully interacted around the camp. Time had not diminished trust or connection. The ritual of food sharing resumed, and Mafal continued his protective patrols. Marcus documented every movement, realizing that these behaviors had become embedded in the lion's daily life, a testament to the enduring impact of empathy and care. Over the following years, Mafal thrived. He successfully raised his cubs to maturity, maintained his protective relationship with Marcus's research operations, and continued to demonstrate behaviors that challenged conventional understanding of predator cognition. When Mafal eventually passed away peacefully at the age of 15, Marcus was present. The lion, once at death's door, had lived a full life, demonstrating intelligence, gratitude, and profound interspecies connection. Reflecting on the entire experience, Marcus acknowledged that saving one life had opened a window into the emotional depths of wildlife. The rescue had begun as a moral and ethical decision in the face of suffering, but it had evolved into proof that empathy, respect, and care could bridge species boundaries in ways previously considered impossible. The Serengeti had taught a lesson Marcus would carry forever. Compassion is universal, and intelligence and emotional awareness are not limited to humans alone. The story of Mafal became a cornerstone for wildlife research, illustrating the potential for emotional bonds between humans and apex predators. It inspired documentaries, scientific studies, and discussions on the ethics of wildlife intervention. Marcus often recounted the experience during lectures and conferences, emphasizing that observation and intervention, when executed with respect and skill, could reveal remarkable insights into animal behavior, consciousness, and interspecies relationships. In the end, the lion who had faced an agonizing death at the hands of millions of flies had not only survived but thrived, reshaping scientific understanding of wildlife intelligence, trust, and emotional capacity. The cubs matured, carrying forward lessons of cooperation, vigilance, and recognition of allies. Marcus, honored with awards for his contributions to animal welfare and conservation science, reflected often. Sometimes saving a single life changes everything, opening doors to understanding, compassion, and a deeper connection to the natural world. And so as the sun set over the Serengeti, casting its golden light across the plains, the memory of Mafal, the lion who had defied death and forged a bond with humans, remained, a lasting testament to the power of courage, empathy, and the extraordinary potential of interspecies trust.